You are listening to Here Before, Here Now, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Here Before, Here Now. I am your host, Colton Schoen. It's been a while. I think it's been about almost a month since my last episode came out. And thank you for listening to it. We're getting some good feedback from people who have listened to the podcast, so make sure you like, rate, and subscribe. Always like to hear what kind of issues and stories and interviews that you would like to have. So please send them my way, colton.schoen@azfamily.com. Also, always on my socials. You can find that easily, Colton Schoen, on many platforms. Today, I'm bringing you our guest, Chelsea Curtis. She is a Diné reporter at the Arizona Luminaria, and she is based in Chandler, and she has covered extensively the crisis affecting a lot of Indigenous communities when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous people. She is actually a recipient of a grant from this really encouraging and great fund, the International Women's Media Foundation's Fund for Indigenous Journalists, to help her tell these stories and also to bring more awareness to this issue. So without further ado, Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Yeah, a little nervous. Out of my comfort zone.
Oh, no, I'm nervous too.
Yeah.
Two nervous people is
Yeah.
not good. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to be fine. Again, talking about some of the work that you've done as a journalist covering these issues, obviously very important and striving to make an impact. It's an issue also that is something that I'm also very, well aware of and have also reported on. But take me back before we get into what you currently do now, how you got into the field of journalism.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into it. I went to school at NAU, and I started as a biochem major.
Biochem,
yeah,
wow.
Totally opposite. After my first year, I just decided it wasn't something I was really interested in doing. Took a few classes, explored, and I just fell into journalism, and I just loved it. I loved holding truth to power, being able to tell people stories. There was just something that resonated with me. I think it kind of goes back to like my grandpa. He was one of the few people in my family that really kept up on news. He loved the Navajo Times. He listened to KTNN all the time and just always tried to advocate, keeping up to date on, politics and Navajo politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's kind of where it really started for me.
Yeah. Wow. Biochem, that's a huge shift,
Yeah,
right?
It really was. Yeah.
Did you have that moment in time where you were like, oh, this is what I'm going to do instead? Like, what was that turning point for you?
Yeah, I did love the classes at NAU, but I think when it really kicked in was when I started doing more hands-on work as an intern at the Arizona Daily Sun. I was there for a full semester. I was one of the few interns at the time that was there almost as much as their staffers. It was just all I needed to do to graduate. And so just getting that hands-on experience, being able to tell people stories, I think just really, sealed the deal for me that this is what I wanted to do.
Did you grow up on the Navajo Nation?
Yeah, I grew up in Sanders, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of on the border, Arizona and New Mexico.
Yeah. Wow. So KTNN. I mean, I still listen to KTNN sometimes here in the Valley. Sometimes when I'm driving in at 2:45 in the morning, you can hit it just right. So I love hearing those news alerts, and I love how they translate it also to the Navajo language. And that's something that your grandfather listened to around you.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually have the app, so sometimes I'll still tune in. My mom just moved to Chandler too, and she'll listen to it, and it's a family favorite.
Yeah. Is there something in particular that you had always wanted to cover when you were an intern at the Daily Sun?
I think I was still trying to figure it out. I did, because I grew up on the Navajo Nation and I am so connected with my family, that was something I wanted to do. I just didn't know how it looked, and that wasn't something that I developed later on. I started working at the Arizona Republic, ended up getting into more breaking news and then criminal justice reporting. And that's when things just started to stand out to me and click about how a lot of this coverage wasn't being in a general grander scheme centered on Indigenous communities. And that was something that I felt like I had the skills to now do myself, and I felt like it's something I really wanted to do, almost felt called to it. And so that's why I started to switch into covering missing and murdered Indigenous people and hopefully criminal justice on a much bigger sort of scale.
It's a different profession, right? People who aren't in the field of journalism, like it's sort of like a calling, right? Like, I mean, I feel like I've always wanted to do this, to be able to shed light on people's stories and tell about, our community. It just kind of pulls you in, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it really does. And, print journalism in particular, there's not a lot of money in it. So a lot of times you are really driven by your passion to continue to do things like this because it's not financially motivated, at least for me. And I just feel like I am doing my small part of like helping people and making an impact on their lives. And that just makes me feel good and it makes me feel like fulfilled.
Yeah. Not only is it not, it can be very, very like hard to make a living doing journalism, but sometimes you expend yourself a lot by telling these stories. Not only are you, talking to people sometimes in their worst moments, but also, dealing with a lot of animosity.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a lot of emotional toll. Even with the last story that I wrote was about Rhea Almeida and her. She was murdered in 2009 in Ajo. She's 7 years old. I spoke with her mom, and that was really intense. There's a lot of emotions there for her mom, and there's a lot of just emotion in the air, and it's just hard to not carry some of that yourself.
Right.
But yeah, there is also the reverse, and I felt this a lot at the Arizona Republic covering police. Of the animosity aspect, people just aren't always happy. There's a lot more scrutiny on news nowadays. So definitely both sides of that.
So why we do it is just it's a mystery, right?
Yeah, it really is. I do think that it really. I spoke to Rhea's mom after the story published, and she was really grateful to have her daughter's story told in a way that she felt was. Honoring her memory in a way that she said hadn't really been done before. And so, that means a lot to me, and it means a lot that her family felt, vindicated after all these years.
So let's get to that story. I actually printed it off. I read it a few days ago, and, it was just I don't know how else to explain it, but her story is just so sad and so tragic. Knowing that I have children of my own and, trying to finding that compassion, that empathy towards this family who just went through this horrific tragedy, I felt sad and sick to my stomach reading it. And to be the person who is going to spend a lot of time researching all of these kinds of stories, how are you taking care of yourself?
I am leaning on my family a lot. I do share how these stories make me feel with them in a way that, I don't always share it with the whole public. They don't get to see that sort of background, behind the scenes look into what goes into a lot of these stories for journalists. And I definitely try to, I have my working hours, but I definitely try to set time where I'm not working because it's important to have a time to get away from this and to have a little break.
So this story about Rhea Almeida is one that highlights the MMIW crisis, and one that has become kind of the cornerstone of your career so far. Can you tell me about Rhea's story and how it fits in with what you're trying to accomplish now?
Yeah, so, the biggest... my project is a two-parter, so I'd like to create a database because that currently doesn't exist in any official capacity yet in Arizona. And I think it's important for it to be a visual sort of database so that people can, visualize certain trends in a way that maybe they haven't seen about this issue. I think data can have a really strong impact on people if they can see it. I think it just changes things in people's minds. And another part is a big part of this is sharing the stories that Indigenous families have so long wanted to share and just haven't been given the attention or the platform to do that. And I just want to give families an opportunity to say, hey, like, tell us about your loved one. What do you need to know about your case? How can we, amplify this message for you? Because there are a lot of like underlying issues within these stories of what's happening across tribal nations that need more attention too. Lack of resources, jurisdictional issues. And so I think highlighting the people first and going beyond the numbers is first and foremost. And that's exactly what Ria's story, I think, is an example of for all the other stories, is putting her first. A lot of the times before this story, the coverage was focused on the man who had murdered her. And there was very little information out there about who Ria was, what did she like to do, what was her family like, and I think that's important because, her story is important and it's almost the most important. And so that's what I wanted to do with Ria's, and that's what I would like to do with anyone else who wants to share their story.
And Ria and her family were living in a tribal nation in southern Arizona when she was raped and murdered.
She was living in Ajo, so it was just right outside. It was a border town of Thanatham Nation, but they're members of Thanatham Nation.
Wow, and just 7 years old. I mean, that's when I was reading the story. It's just so sad for you're right, the coverage to be focused so much on the suspect or who ended up getting convicted of this, not hearing about this crisis in a more broader scale. Yeah,
exactly. And her mom wasn't happy with the way her daughter's murder was depicted in some cases. It came off a little too brutal for her. And it was really, I think, traumatizing. And so I think, again, this is just highlights her daughter in a better, positive light.
How many stories of families have you been able to, I guess, write about or compile as part of this project?
Yeah, so it's a work in process. I am aiming for 10 to 15 within this first year. But this took a lot of research, and some of them are being held up because of public records requests. So I am working on two that are focused on I'm working on two that specifically are focusing on a case, but I'm also writing profiles about advocates, people that are kind of working behind the scenes to actively address MMIP in Arizona.
And this movement has grown from MMIP to a much larger, more inclusive term, right? Can you go into that? Because, yes, women and girls are affected, but you're also trying to point to the fact that it's also affecting other people as well.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of different acronyms now. There's MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, WG, Women and Girls, and then MMIP was meant to be more inclusive, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, because this is also affecting men. My project specifically is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit, and Transgender People, which are people that are members of LGBTQ community, and they often go missing in a lot of this too. A lot of this data, especially the data isn't in police reports. They're not necessarily taken into account in those sort of ways that they prefer to be identified as. So I am trying to also find information about that.
In my reporting, when I talk to family members of those who have experienced this crisis or even trafficked victims in the past, a lot of what they'll say is, this is an issue and this is a crisis that's been going on for decades, hundreds of years, and we're just finally catching on nationally with the attention on it. What do you think about that in terms of how long it's taken for this to become the center of TV shows on prime time and movies? What do you think?
Yeah, it really is. On one hand, it's great that it's being focused on now. On another hand, it is actually kind of unfortunate that it has taken this long. There have been advocates working on this for a long time before it even had an official name, who have been trying to bring awareness to this, it still just wasn't getting the attention it deserves, and it just doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of times Indigenous people, Indigenous communities do feel ignored by general society, in the news. They just don't feel that they're being heard. They don't feel that their stories are being told. And I'm not really sure why that just happens to be the case all the time, but it is really frustrating.
Yeah, I just saw, a post a few days ago that said that, Native Americans here in our own land became citizens of the United States 100 years ago. Like, when you think about that, you're right. When it comes to people not having a voice or feeling like they have one, or feeling that they're discounted or not really considered as part of the wider, larger society, it makes it hard for people to want to come forward to talk about these types of stories.
Exactly. And I have come across that in my reporting with this specifically, where people have, declined having a conversation with me just because I am a reporter, and they don't feel comfortable, and they don't trust me. They don't know who I am. They don't trust that a news organization will listen to them or, write a story in a fair, accurate way. So that's something that still is, a barrier, and that I'm hoping to break down.
Do you feel like because of your background, being a Native person, that they're more open to talking to you?
I think sometimes it helps, but I think it also, I'm not a member of Thana O'odham Nation.
Sure, absolutely.
And so to them, even though I am Native,
right.
I am an outsider.
Right.
And so it just, it depends.
Sure, I totally get that. Yeah, definitely. I totally understand where you're coming from at that end. And do you think that, being a Native journalist, that finding these stories has, I guess, put upon you this responsibility to tell these stories because you have this perspective?
Yeah, a little bit, to be honest. I felt like, my community raised me, and the least I could do is use the skills that I have to highlight issues I know that they're dealing with, and that I know they want to be talked about more. And so I do feel a sense of responsibility of doing my part for my community, to use the skills that I've had and take it back home almost.
I saw that on your story and other write-ups that you've done, you're soliciting for people to come forward and share their experiences with this online questionnaire. What are some of the questions you ask on that questionnaire, and what are some of the responses that you've received?
The responses actually haven't been as much as I was hoping for, and I just think that maybe a lot of people don't know about it yet. We are still a really small news organization, and we're very Tucson-centered, so it is hard to get all the way across the state sometimes. But the questions that I am asking are, and it's open for them to answer as much as they want or as little as they want. But to just share, a description of their loved one's situation, if they can, a case number, because that will help me be able to find public records if there's something related to their loved one's case, names, tribal affiliations, how they identify, that sort of thing, and then contact information if they would like to have a conversation.
So this database that you're currently building, when is that projected to come out so people can take a look and see, wow, in my own community, this is happening? Yeah,
we're hoping by November at the latest, although that's in flux. We might do it sooner, but at the absolutely latest is November.
When it comes to how far we've come with this crisis in terms of the attention that it's been given, May 5th is a day that's been proclaimed, I think here in Arizona, also nationally by this current administration as MMIW Day or MMIP, really highlighting this issue. Do you think the awareness is enough, or what needs to happen to actually find change?
Yeah, I think a lot of the change does rely in, just from what I'm seeing and hearing, is policy, because it is great to have the awareness, but that doesn't change things for family and how families and how this is still occurring. So I think where it lies is in increasing resources and policy changes that help, decrease these sort of numbers.
Yeah. So when you are writing about these stories, what is your goal?
Again, I think my goal first and foremost is just to give families a platform to share their stories. I think, and to humanize the people that have maybe never had their stories told before, that are showing up in, reporting or databases or studies that the state is doing as just a overall tally or a number. I think that's first and foremost is just telling their stories.
It seems like when it comes to this crisis, a lot of people in tribal and Native communities have been impacted in some way. What are you finding when you speak with people about this, even if it's just like not a part of your reporting, but talking with people?
Yeah. One thing that has been kind of standing out with me is that every person, Indigenous person that I've talked to related to this, even if I'm talking to them as an advocate, who's just, doing the work behind the scenes to address this issue, they all have a story related to MMI. They know or they have a loved one in their family who has been murdered, who has been missing. I don't think I've come across one person so far who hasn't said that they don't, have an uncle who is missing or aunt who was murdered, or and that's been pretty sad realization for me, and kind of surprising. And I don't know why I was surprised. I guess I just didn't. I didn't really sit with it to expect answers from everybody about that.
The woman you profiled in this story with Raya, correct?
Yeah, Rhea.
Rhea. Her own mother didn't really understand what MMIW was until she went to an event. When you talk to people about what you do and what you're reporting on, do they also have questions like, what exactly is this? What is MMIW? What is MMIP?
It happens a lot of times outside of Indigenous communities. Typically, Indigenous people seem to know what I'm talking about. I haven't had questions about, what it is. But yeah, definitely when I, just talk to people randomly about what I do, they will ask, like, what is MMIW? And some people say, like, oh, I think I've heard of that. Or some people just have no idea.
Right.
And
so, the awareness days aren't enough then, right?
No, for sure. I think it's getting better. I think before it was probably a lot more of, like, what is that? There is now some, like, oh, well, I think I've heard of that. Or there are people, of course, that are like, hey, this is amazing that you're doing this. I have heard about it. Some people have even offered to help, some readers, which has been really cool. So I do think it's getting better. But yeah, I think there's room for improvement.
One of the things that I've noticed, especially being in this field and also making it sort of like my mission to tell stories about Indigenous communities and issues that impact the Indian country, that I've noticed now is that there are so many more Native or Indigenous journalists in the field now. I mean, I've spoken to many of them on my podcast. I've talked to them for stories on several other different occasions. And as I was coming into this business, I feel like that wasn't really the case. That is such a cool thing to see more people who identify as Native or Indigenous working in newsrooms and trying to get these stories out.
No, I agree. I have actually noticed that too. And I think that's really fantastic. I think, it is important to include Indigenous people in telling Indigenous stories because there's so many intricacies, and unless you're a part of that community, sometimes you just don't know, and the cultural awareness of it. And so I do think it's important to have Indigenous people involved, if not leading coverage of Indigenous communities. And I think a part of that is, unfortunately, it's one of those things that is so new. Covering Indigenous communities is a new thing. It hasn't been the leading coverage before. It seems to be getting better. And so considering that this is, new ground, I guess, it is good to have Indigenous people leading that and kind of showing others the way of how to do it appropriately.
What do you think was like the pushing point for that, to see more Native or Indigenous journalists out there?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. It is, I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's
I'm
great.
here for it.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. But myself too, within the last, I think, 5 years, I've seen like this huge explosion of Native reporters and journalists, whether it's print, whether it's online, documentary makers. I just like wondering, what was that event that made that happen? Maybe we were just like tired of not being able to tell our own stories.
Yeah, maybe. It could be that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but I am all for it too. I think it's amazing.
I remember during the pandemic seeing a lot of Native TikToks too, and like having that. And I'm wondering if that was part of what brought more people into this type of discussion or this field. So
yeah, I'm not sure. I do wonder how much the COVID pandemic played a role on it, because Navajo Nation is getting covered nationally,
Right.
Internationally for what was happening on Navajo, and so maybe that's part of it. But
yeah, so interesting.
yeah.
So if people are interested in finding out more about your project and participating in that online questionnaire, where can they find that info?
Yeah, it's on our website at azluminaria.org. That's AZLUMINARIA. Sorry. I'm
a terrible speller. I'm a terrible speller too.
I always go too fast and miss something.
No, I've always, whenever I type my scripts, there's always like red lines underneath. So I always have to go back and fix that. But, thank you for coming on to my show and talking about this, because, this is something that I feel obviously needs to have attention called to it, and also some solutions. I know that there are, things going on right now. I think a couple of states like Washington and Colorado have started doing MMIP alerts. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So like, those types of things to, address this crisis, because it's been happening for far too long.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I appreciate you for having me on. I just wanted to, I'm just trying to let people know that this project is happening, so that, if they want to talk, then they can. So that's, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and we'll try to get the link in this video link too on our website as well. All right, well, thank you so much, Chelsea, for being here on the show today. Any other things you want to mention before we go?
No, we do have some relatively new news. The project was being funded for a year by International Women's Media Foundation's Fund for Indigenous Journalists, but we did get another year of funding from the Data Driven Reporting Project. So we'll be extending for another year. So I'm really excited about that. So I'll have more time to chat with people and write more profiles. So yeah, excited about that.
All right. Awesome. Chelsea, thank you so much. And that's going to do it for this episode of Here Before, Here Now. You can like, rate, and subscribe. Also send me your ideas of who you like to be interviewed, and also topics at colton.schoen@azfamily.com. Till next time.
This is Here Before, Here Now, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.